Hello and welcome to Transfermarkt TV. I'm Manuel, he's Stefan Bienkowski, and today's big topic is Moussa Diaby, the Bayer Leverkusen winger, who is heavily linked with a move to Aston Villa, but also Saudi club Al Nassr. And everyone who's following the news knows that whenever a player is for sale, whenever there's a Saudi club involved, the price does one thing, and that means going up. Leverkusen must be rubbing their hands. Stefan, what's the latest on this?
Yeah, so there were reports this week that Aston Villa have placed a bid for Diaby. I believe they're about 35 million euros. And, they've been heavily linked with Diaby for quite some time now. They obviously signed Leon Bailey, who's a similar player, similar profile of player as well from Leverkusen not so long ago, but they've obviously got a very ambitious new sporting project, got a sporting director, got a very impressive impressive manager, shall I say. He's a perfectly normal aged manager, and you can see that they're also making moves to kind of push for those European spots. And Diaby is just one of these players who's kind of perennially been linked with the Premier League, long before the likes of Aston Villa and Newcastle, who are the other team, were linked. Seems as though every kind of passing year there was someone. But this is kind of the first time we've seen some serious offers for him. The offer that Villa have made, I've been told, is well short of what Leverkusen want for Diaby. I've been told they're looking for about 65 million euros. But the other thing that's also worth bearing in mind here is that a lot of whether the player decides to move on or not will come down to him himself. Sometimes clubs are quite gleefully pushing players out the door when the right offer comes in, or sometimes players are pushing through moves. But in this regard, Leverkusen are quite happy to stick with Diaby for next season. They don't really have any intention, or certainly not rushing any moves to move him on. And, even if the likes of Villa or Newcastle were to match that £65 million price tag, it would then come down to whether the player even wants to make the move. And, from what I've been told, he'll be looking for a significant pay rise to what he's getting at Leverkusen. Now, he could get that in Newcastle. He could maybe get that at Aston Villa. But I think the kind of bottom line here is that if Villa really want Diaby, they're going to have to get very serious and probably have to put a lot of money on the table to sign him. And I guess that's kind of where it comes down to whether it's actually feasible for Villa or not. Because if you're talking about €65 million signing and a player who would potentially want top wages on top of that, that's a lot of money to put on Diaby kind of hitting the ground running in the Premier League. And I guess we'll just have to wait and see if Villa or Newcastle do come in with an offer for him and see if they can match what Leverkusen want. But for now, Villa are some way off what Leverkusen want.
And I was having spent quite a bit of time in Leverkusen and with the people there. It wouldn't even shock me if Al Nassr comes in with a bid that entices Diaby, and they are more than ready to pay his wages and probably also the fee to Leverkusen. As I guess it then becomes a question whether the player finds a move to Saudi Arabia attractive. I guess Newcastle has those very same connections. But Stefan, Diaby, there is good reasons why he is being linked to all these clubs. He had a slow start last year. Didn't quite match the numbers or the figures from the previous year. We had 13 goals and 12 assists. It ended up with 9 goals, 9 assists. But with that in mind, also, he had a very slow start, right? So the numbers are there to give you good reason to think that Diaby could come to a Premier League club, be surrounded by good players, and produce right away.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's probably worth bearing in mind with him and his spell at Leverkusen is that, Leverkusen have had a lot of players kind of come and go. They've had a lot of kind of forward players who've either, actually most often than not, it's injuries. You look at kind of Patrick Schick or Florian Wirtz most recently as the kind of talisman of that team. They've both had serious injuries in recent years. Wirtz looks like he's back to his best since he kind of returned to the team in January. Patrick Schick most recently actually picked up a big injury. He's got about till, I think, October. And throughout all that, Diaby has kind of been the kind of fallback player, if you will. Not in the sense that he didn't start in the first place, but he has kind of stepped up a lot of times and proved to be the kind of talisman or the kind of just the player that attack has been built around when both of those players have been out. To the extent, actually, I think Leverkusen over the last 2 or 3 seasons have actually tried to sign players to kind of take the workload off them. Callum Hudson-Odoi was a good example of that, who they brought in on loan off Chelsea last season or last summer in the hope that they could kind of slot him in whenever Diaby was kind of, had maybe played too many games or was feeling a bit jaded. And that move didn't quite work out. But I think that kind of illustrates just how much Leverkusen have relied on Diaby in recent seasons. I've seen a lot of Leverkusen fans on my Twitter account today when I've been talking about Diaby and Frimpong, and I mentioned the fact that, Leverkusen are quite happy to stick with Diaby, but if an offer came in for Frimpong, they would be happy to sell him. And I think some Leverkusen fans are quite annoyed about that because they seem to rate Frimpong as the better player, the more important player. But I think that would maybe go some way to kind of overlooking just how much Diaby has done for this club over the last 3 or 4 seasons. And, that's an important thing to factor into all this when we consider whether he wants to move on. He has built up his reputation, he's built up his career at Leverkusen, and I think he'll probably be very careful as to where he goes next, if at all, in terms of whether he get better options.
Of course, and I think too that Leverkusen maybe could use that money to sign a centre forward, as you said, Patrick Schick, out long term. And they are a club that, having spoken to Simon Rolf as the sporting director in the past, that do focus on moving players on. Of course, their ideal scenario every single time is to move those players onto a Champions League club because they want to be known as a club that is just below that category. And is growing towards becoming that category themselves, right? So, it's an interesting one. Stay tuned on Transfermarkt. We'll have lots of info. We have all the latest info on this all the time. Check out the latest transfers. Check out the rumor mill. Stay tuned for more, is what I'm going to say. And until then, cheers and bye-bye.